The white dress lay crumpled on the floor, a forgotten promise. David stood across the room, his voice flat. "It's over, Sarah." My mother, Helen, stood beside me, her hands shaking as she reached for my arm. His eyes, once so warm, now held a cold indifference, a stranger looking through me. "You always were too much." I first saw David across the university lecture hall. He was 24, 2 years my senior, and his laugh carried above the usual drone of student chatter, bright and uninhibited. I was 22, still figuring out what I wanted beyond the next assignment. He had an easy charm about him, a quick wit that made others lean in. His intelligence was clear, but he wore it lightly, never boasting. We started talking after a seminar, discussing the failings of the assigned texts, and somehow the conversation flowed for hours without effort, spilling out into the drizzly London street. Those early years blurred into a comfortable rhythm. We navigated the city's winding paths together, exploring forgotten parks and crowded markets. London wasn't just a city, it became our shared world, a poem, a backdrop to our growing connection. We learned each other's habits, shared our small victories, and comforted each other through minor setbacks. When my student loan ran short during my final year, David simply handled it. "Don't worry about it, Sarah," he'd said, his hand resting on my knee. "Just focus on your studies." It wasn't a grand gesture, just a quiet, solid act of support that settled deep within me, a promise without words. We both found our footing professionally after graduation. I landed a position in marketing, building campaigns for a tech startup. David, with his degree in finance, moved steadily through a respected firm. We celebrated each other's promotions, each new project a joint triumph. Our lives felt intertwined, each success bolstering the other. We saved diligently, piece by careful piece, and after 3 years of rented flats, we found our own small house. It was on Elm Street, a quiet stretch with mature trees and neighbors who kept their lawns tidy. The paint on the porch was peeling, and the rose bushes were wild, but it was ours. David carried me over the threshold the day we got the keys, his strong arms making me feel light. "Next time, Mrs. Miller," he whispered, a smile touching his eyes, and the sound of my future name felt like a warm cloak. My family welcomed David without reservation. My mother, Helen, a practical woman who didn't waste words, saw his steady nature. "He's a good sort, Sarah," she'd say over Sunday dinner, watching him patiently explain something to my younger brother Gary, or help Mark clear the table. My brothers, often wary of anyone who took my attention, quickly grew to respect him. He listened when they talked about their work, offered quiet advice, and knew how to hold his own in a good-natured argument. David's mother, Martha, was a different kind of welcome. She was a woman of fewer smiles, initially observing me with a careful gaze. Her approval when it came was a slow thaw, earned over shared meals and quiet conversations. She began to share small family traditions, teaching me David's grandmother's recipe for pierogi, her hands floury as she guided mine. "It's good to see someone honor his heritage," she said one afternoon, her voice softer than usual. "You're family now, Sarah." Her words were a quiet blessing, a solidifying of our bond beyond just David and me. 3 years into our life in the Elm Street house, David proposed. He took me back to the park where we'd had our first picnic, the same worn wooden bench, the same unpretentious pastries from the bakery we used to frequent. We talked about old times, about how much had changed, how much had stayed the same. When I bit into the custard-filled pastry, my teeth hit something hard. A tiny cold lump. I pulled it out, a small diamond ring glittering in the afternoon sun. He got down on one knee, his eyes earnest, the question unspoken but clear. I didn't hesitate. The next few months were a whirl of planning. I immersed myself in every detail. The dress, a soft cream, shimmered under the fitting room lights. David chose a dark blue suit, a striking compliment. We spent evenings addressing handcrafted invitations, sealing them with wax. We booked the historic St. Jude's Church, its stained glass windows promising a solemn beauty. The grand reception hall, with its high ceilings and polished wood floors, felt perfectly suited for the celebration we envisioned. We planned a fusion menu, a nod to both our backgrounds, and hired a string quartet for the ceremony and a lively local band for the dancing. The floors promised cream and blush roses, soft and elegant, cascading over every surface. Even the unpredictable London weather seemed to be cooperating, offering mild, clear days as the date drew closer. Everything felt perfect, a series of small confirmations that our future was not just a dream, but a carefully constructed reality, ready to unfold. 5 days before our wedding, David left for his bachelor party. It was planned for an upscale resort an hour outside the city, a place known for its manicured golf courses and fine dining. I'd felt a prickle of unease when he first mentioned it, the kind of vague worry that settles in the stomach. Bachelor parties, in my experience, could veer into loud, regrettable territory. But David had waved off my concerns with a confident hand. "It's a sophisticated affair, love," he'd explained, his smile easy. "Golf, dinner, good cigars, nothing to worry about." He had pulled me close then, his chin resting on my head, and murmured, "My commitment is entirely to you, Sarah. Always." The words had felt like solid ground beneath my feet, firm and reassuring. My own bachelorette celebration was a quieter affair. My closest friends, Lisa among them, met me in a patch of wild grass near the Thames. We spread out a blanket, uncorked a bottle of crisp white wine, and nibbled on small sandwiches and strawberries. The air smelled of damp earth and late spring blossoms. Butterflies drifted over the wildflowers, and the distant cooing of doves seemed to underscore the peaceful afternoon. We reminisced about our university days, giggling over forgotten crushes and shared anxieties, the years falling away with each memory. Lisa handed me a small box, something old, new, borrowed in blue, she'd said, her eyes shining. Inside was a delicate lace handkerchief, a new silver charm, a sapphire pin that had been her grandmother's, and a tiny blue ribbon tied around it all. Each item felt like a small, tangible blessing. Later, my parents, Helen and John, found us. They brought a box of pastries from our favorite bakery, their faces alight with a quiet pride. "Just wanted to see my girl," my mother said, her voice softer than usual. My father nodded, squeezing my shoulder. Even my brothers, Mark and Gary, usually reserved, offered genuine smiles and good-natured teasing, their happiness for me clear. That morning, David's mother, Martha, had called. Her voice, usually so steady, held a tremor of emotion. "I'm so happy to be gaining a daughter, Sarah," she'd said. "You're a good woman for my son." Each word felt like a confirmation, a warm thread woven into the fabric of my life. Everything from the weather to Martha's unexpected tenderness felt like a series of small, perfect signs. Our future seemed to stretch before us, clear and unmarred, a painting yet to be filled with color. I remember thinking, with a certainty that now feels like a cruel joke, that nothing could possibly go wrong. I could never have imagined that David's bachelor party, that weekend of golf, dinner, and cigars, would be the catalyst for destruction. David returned the following evening. He walked through the front door, his golf bag slung over his shoulder, and the immediate shift in the house's atmosphere was palpable. The lights seemed to dim, the air suddenly heavier. His usual energy, that easy confidence, was gone. In its place was a distant, distracted look, his eyes moving over familiar objects as if seeing them for the first time. He didn't meet my gaze directly. His excitement, which had been a constant hum for weeks, had simply vanished, replaced by a quiet emptiness. He moved through our home like a stranger. He put his bag down by the staircase, then picked it up again, moving it to the utility room. He started making a cup of tea, then stopped mid-motion, leaving the kettle cold on the counter. Sentences began, then trailed off, like thoughts that couldn't quite form. "I was thinking about well, never mind." It was unsettling, this quiet unraveling of the man I knew. "Is everything all right, David?" I asked finally, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching him stare blankly at the cupboard. My voice sounded too loud in the sudden silence. He startled, his head snapping toward me. For a moment, his eyes were wide, almost wild. Then just as quickly, the expression smoothed away. He walked over, pulling me into an embrace that was tighter than usual, a subtle tension in his arms. It wasn't the warm, familiar hug I was used to. It felt like a grip, a silent effort to hold something together. "Pre-wedding jitters, I suppose," he mumbled into my hair, his voice muffled, a little hoarse. The words were meant to be dismissive, a simple explanation. But something in his tone, A flat, rehearsed quality sent a small, cold shiver down my spine. The alarm bells were there, ringing softly in the quiet of our kitchen, but I, caught in the current of wedding preparations and hopeful expectation, chose not to listen. The night before the wedding, David and I parted ways at the front door of our house. We stood there under the porch light, the air cool and still. The kiss we shared was brief, almost hesitant, a slight tension in his lips. He was going to his parents' home, a tradition for the groom, while I was staying at our house, where my mother and bridesmaids would join me for the morning preparations. "See you at the altar," he'd murmured, and then he was gone, the taillights of his car disappearing down Elm Street. I went inside, the silence of the empty house suddenly heavy. I tried to sleep, but it was a fitful, shallow kind of rest. Dreams flickered at the edges of my consciousness, unsettling images that dissolved the moment I tried to grasp them. Each time I stirred, a vague unease settled over me, a sensation like a distant storm. I attributed it to bride's nerves, a common enough affliction, and tried to push it away. Before dawn, my mother Helen arrived. She moved quietly through the house, the familiar clinking of teacups and the scent of fresh coffee a welcome comfort. She laid out croissants and fruit on the kitchen table, her presence a steadying force. "You need a good breakfast, sweetheart," she'd said, her hand warm on my arm. A little while later, Lisa and the other bridesmaids arrived, their energy a joyful burst in the quiet house. They spilled in, arms laden with garment bags, makeup cases, and bottles of champagne. The house quickly filled with a happy chaos of chatter and laughter. "To the most beautiful bride London has ever seen," Lisa declared, holding up her glass, her eyes sparkling. "And to the luckiest groom." We all clinked glasses, the bubbly effervescence tickling my nose. The morning hummed with excitement, a whirlwind of curling irons, lipstick, and nervous adjustments to dresses. I watched myself transform in the mirror, the cream gown settling perfectly, my hair artfully arranged. Every detail was as we'd planned, a testament to months of careful organization. We arrived at the magnificent hall, its high ceilings and polished floors already decorated. The florist had outdone herself. Cream and blush roses cascaded from every available surface, their delicate scent filling the air. Gold and silver accents glittered softly, reflecting the muted light. My friends were still buzzing, their excitement undimmed, their chatter a cheerful backdrop. But beneath my own smile, a strange calm had settled, a quiet space amidst the noise, tinged with a persistent, growing dread. It was like a flat, dull note amidst a symphony, subtle but insistent. The first guests began to arrive, their murmurs carrying through the open doors. I could hear snippets of conversation, laughter, the rustle of silk and wool. My heart started to pound, a slow, heavy beat in my chest, a mixture of anticipation and an anxiety I couldn't name. I stood in a small antechamber, just off the main aisle, waiting for the signal. The wedding coordinator had promised to tell us when everyone was seated, when David was in place, ready for my entrance. I watched the antique clock on the wall, its steady tick-tock marking the slow passage of time. Then the door opened, and a different kind of energy entered the room. The wedding coordinator, a young woman named Chloe, rushed in. Her usually composed face was pale, her movements jerky. She bypassed the bridesmaids, her eyes scanning the room for Helen. She found her, pulling her aside into a corner, her words a hushed, urgent whisper. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw Helen's face drain of color, her usually steady posture slump. My mother looked up, her eyes wide with something close to panic. She met my gaze, then quickly looked away, as if unable to bear the sight. She walked towards me, her steps hesitant. "Honey," she began, her voice a strained whisper. There's been a delay." She stammered over the words, her hands twisting the small clutch bag she held. Her eyes darted around the room, anywhere but mine. The blood in my veins seemed to turn to ice. A cold, hard knot tightened in my stomach. The bride's nerves I dismissed earlier suddenly felt like a prophecy. I knew with a certainty that seized my breath that this was far more than a delay. This was the worst. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Helen wrung her hands. He's been unavoidably detained, sweetheart." The words felt hollow, a flimsy shield over something much worse. Unavoidably detained, it was too vague, too rehearsed. The phrase felt wrong, a lie struggling to take shape. My stomach clenched, tighter than before. Just then the door opened again. My brothers, Mark and Gary, entered the room. Their faces were grim, their usual boisterousness replaced by a heavy silence. They didn't need to say anything. Their expressions confirmed the unspoken fear that had begun to bloom in my chest. Something truly serious was wrong. Mark, the older one, stepped forward. He reached for my hand, his grip firm, warm. His eyes, usually full of teasing mischief, were now clouded with a deep sadness. "David isn't coming, Sarah," he said, his voice heavy, each word a physical blow. A cold wave washed over me, a sudden chill that permeated my bones. "What are you talking about?" I managed, my voice thin, reedy. "There must be a mistake. He's probably just stuck in traffic. He wouldn't do this." I looked around at their faces, searching for a sign of a misunderstanding, a shared joke I wasn't privy to. But their expressions remained grim, unwavering. Gary, usually the quieter one, stepped closer. In his hand, he held a single envelope. It was cream-colored, the kind we had chosen for our invitations, and on it, my name was scrawled in David's familiar, confident handwriting. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, the paper feeling oddly heavy, significant. I tore it open, the rustle of the paper loud in the suddenly silent room. His words were brief, a clumsy tangle of apology and desperate self-preservation. He wrote about the bachelor party, about Jessica Barnes. He couldn't, he said, go through with it. He was a coward, he admitted, unable to face me, unable to face the life we'd built. The words blurred before my eyes, then sharpened, each one a nail driven into my heart. Jessica Barnes. The name hung in the air, cold and foreign. He had another woman at his bachelor party. He couldn't go through with the wedding. It felt like a physical punch to the gut, winded and breathless. My world, which had been so carefully constructed, so meticulously planned, shattered around me in an instant. The noise from beyond the dressing room, the murmur of the waiting guests, the soft prelude music from the string quartet, the excited chatter of the bridesmaids just moments ago, all faded into a distant, muffled hum. It was as if I'd been plunged underwater, everything muted and far away. Helen was there, pulling me into a fierce embrace, her own tears wet against my cheek. Lisa knelt beside me, her hand rubbing small circles on my back, murmuring soft words of comfort that didn't penetrate the shock. I heard Mark's voice then, clearer than the others. He'd stepped out of the room, presumably to address the gathering. His voice was strained, tight with suppressed anger and sorrow, as he announced the cancellation. "There's been an unforeseen circumstance," he said, his words formal, controlled. "The wedding will not be proceeding today." I heard the collective gasp, the immediate ripple of whispers, the confused exclamations from beyond the door. Faces, which had moments ago beamed with anticipation, would now be contorted with bewilderment and pity. The beautiful wedding dress, which I had chosen with such joy, now felt like a cruel mockery. Its silk, once soft against my skin, now felt like a heavy shroud, a symbol of a dream that had been ripped apart, exposed and broken. I sank to the floor, the delicate fabric pooling around me. The full, crushing weight of David's betrayal descended, heavy and absolute. "He abandoned me," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, the truth bitter and undeniable. The grand reception hall emptied quickly. The string quartet had packed their instruments. The caterers were already stacking chairs. All that remained were the scattered rose petals on the polished floor, the half-eaten pastries, and the shimmering gold and silver decorations that now looked garish in the stark silence. It was a scene of abandoned finery, a stark testament to a future that had dissolved. My mother Helen steered me through it all, her arm tight around my waist, guiding me like a sleepwalker. I felt nothing, a hollow space where my heart should have been. They took me home. The house on Elm Street, which for so long had been the symbol of our shared future, now felt hollow, echoing with a ghost that wasn't there but whose presence was undeniable. Every corner, every object spoke of David. His coffee mug on the counter, his book by the bed, the faint scent of his cologne in the air. It was a suffocating emptiness. The news, as it always does in small circles, spread rapidly. My phone vibrated endlessly with calls and texts from friends and family. Their pity, their shock, their expressions of concern felt like open wounds, each message a painful reminder of what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I simply stared at the screen, watching the names flash by. I tried to call David once, then twice, then a dozen times. His phone was off. His silence was deafening, absolute. No explanation, no regret, just the cold, impersonal voicemail greeting. He had simply vanished. Then Martha, David's mother, called. Her voice was raw, choked with sobs. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," she wailed, her grief palpable even through the phone line. "He's disgraced our family. I can't believe he'd do something like this." She confirmed what I already knew. David was unreachable even to her. He had cut himself off completely. Her devastation was a mirror of my own, but hers was tinged with the shame of a mother whose son had done the unthinkable. For days, I stayed in our room, the curtains drawn. I couldn't eat. Sleep came in ragged, brief snatches, filled with formless anxieties. Every moment of our life together replayed in my mind. The university lecture hall, the picnics in the park, the day he carried me over the threshold. I questioned everything. Was our love real? Had it all been a performance? Was our shared history, the years we'd spent building a life, nothing more than a carefully constructed lie? The image of the diamond ring, once a symbol of his devotion, now twisted into something manipulative, a cruel trick hidden in a sweet pastry. It felt like I was watching my own life from a distance, trying to decipher a language I no longer understood. If you are listening to this story, stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. My brothers, Mark and Gary, eventually showed up. They didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, they moved through the house with a quiet, stoic purpose. They began to pack David's belongings, carefully placing his books and clothes into cardboard boxes. The methodical act was a silent comfort. "He won't get away with this, Sarah," Mark vowed, his voice low and firm, seeing the blank despair in my eyes. The words, uttered with such conviction, struck a chord. Amidst the numbness and the crushing weight of betrayal, a flicker of something else began to stir within me. It was a small, hot seed of anger, warm and unfamiliar. It wasn't the searing rage I might have expected, but a steady, cold resolve. I started to read again, not the novels I usually favored, but self-help books my friends had left for me. Their pages filled with advice on resilience and rebuilding. Each sentence felt like a small anchor in a storm. "I won't let him break me," I decided, wiping away the persistent tears with the back of my hand. The words were a quiet declaration, whispered into the empty room, but they resonated with a new steely glint in my eyes. Weeks blurred into months. I returned to work, the familiar routine a shaky anchor in my upended life. But my focus was fractured. Reports sat half-finished on my screen, emails piled up, and conversations drifted past me, unheard. There was an emptiness where David used to be, a persistent void in the everyday rhythm of our shared home, our shared life. The silence in the evenings, the absence of his footsteps, of his voice, was a constant, dull ache. One evening, Lisa managed to coax me out for dinner. We sat in a quiet Italian place, far from the bustling main streets. As she talked, my gaze drifted across the room, past the linen-draped tables and soft lamplight. Then I saw him, David. He was seated at a corner table, his head thrown back in a laugh I knew intimately. Across from him sat a woman, her hand resting easily in his. "That's her, isn't it?" Lisa whispered, her voice low, sensing the sudden rigidity in my posture. My breath hitched. It was Jessica Barnes, the name from the letter, now a face, a physical presence. My eyes fixated on their intertwined hands, the casual intimacy of their posture, the way David looked at her. It wasn't the distant, distracted look he'd worn in our kitchen. It was the easy, charming smile I had known, now directed at someone else. A sickening wave of recognition washed over me, a gut punch that left me breathless. Jessica was significantly younger than me, perhaps only in her mid-20s. Her hair was a bright, artificial blonde, styled perfectly. She wore a dress that shimmered with sequins, expensive but loud, and diamond earrings that caught the light, sparkling with a boldness that screamed, new money. Her vivaciousness seemed to fill their small corner of the restaurant, a stark contrast to my own quiet grief. The pieces clicked, sharp and cold. David hadn't simply found another woman, he had chosen this. He had chosen a superficial fling, a glittering distraction over the years of shared history, the profound connection we had painstakingly built. My grief, which had been a heavy shroud, began to transform. It sharpened, twisting into a hot, burning desire for retribution. The sorrow didn't vanish, but it now carried a fierce, metallic tang. I started to move, subtly, discreetly. My work in marketing had given me a network, a web of contacts in various industries. I knew how to dig, how to piece together information without drawing attention. Within days, I had a clearer picture of Jessica Barnes. She was, as her appearance suggested, the daughter of a prominent real estate developer, a man known for his aggressive business tactics and a whisper of ethical gray areas. Jessica herself was not just a pretty face. She was involved in her father's company, managing their investment portfolios, handling their more complex financial dealings. The revelation settled in my mind like a cold, hard stone. David's interest in Jessica wasn't purely romantic, I realized. Jessica represented new avenues, new connections, a world of wealth and opportunity that he, with his sharp financial mind, would undoubtedly leverage. He hadn't just abandoned me, he had strategically upgraded. He had chosen ambition over loyalty, greed over love. The idea of revenge, which had been a raw, shapeless emotion, solidified into a clear, cold, and calculated plan. It wasn't about anger anymore. Not entirely. It was about justice, about balancing the scales. They built their happiness on my destruction, I muttered to myself, staring out the window at the familiar Elm Street. The words were a quiet vow, my resolve hardening, turning into something as unyielding as iron. My anger, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, became the engine for meticulous planning. I channeled every ounce of my business acumen into it. David and Jessica. They had built their new life, their new ambitions, on the wreckage of mine. Now I would find the fault lines in their foundation. I began researching their financial dealings, digging for vulnerabilities, for any weak point I could exploit. It was a painstaking process requiring long hours behind my computer, sifting through public records, corporate filings, and industry reports. I discovered Jessica was deeply involved in a high-stakes land development deal, one that raised more than a few ethical questions. Her father's company, I learned, had a reputation for cutting corners, for sidestepping regulations, and for using questionable practices to maximize profit. Meanwhile, David, I knew, harbored a long-standing aspiration for a prestigious medical position within a new state-of-the-art hospital project currently in its planning stages. The pieces began to fit together, forming a grim mosaic. Jessica offered the financial and political connections, and David offered his professional expertise, a clean face for dirty money. My plan began to form, clear and sharp. It wasn't enough to just expose Jessica's company. I needed to link David to her shady dealings, to show the true cost of his ambition. I reactivated old university contacts, people I'd known from various clubs and societies, now holding positions in journalism, local government, and even minor regulatory bodies. I leveraged my professional network, carefully extracting information, always subtly, always without revealing my true intent. I started compiling a dossier. It grew page by page, filled with financial irregularities, environmental violations tied to Jessica's father's past projects, and thinly veiled conflicts of interest. The evidence was irrefutable, painting a picture of systemic ethical compromise. "This isn't just about revenge, Lisa," I told her one afternoon, my voice flat but firm, as she watched me meticulously organize stacks of documents. "It's about justice." She looked at the papers, then at me. There was hesitation in her eyes, a concern for my state of mind, but she also saw the depth of my pain, the unwavering resolve that had replaced my earlier despair. She didn't argue. She simply nodded, offering quiet, steady support. I identified a local investigative journalist, a former classmate from university, Mark Jenkins. He had a reputation for dogged reporting and a keen eye for local corruption. I carefully selected the information, ensuring it was verifiable, damning, and directly implicated Jessica's company. I made sure to include details that, when properly investigated, would lead straight to David's potential involvement, his ambition clearly linked to Jessica's questionable business practices. I leaked the information anonymously, a series of untraceable emails with encrypted attachments. I knew Mark would be intrigued. The story had all the elements of a front-page scandal. He began his own investigation, unaware that the trail he was following had been laid, brick by painstaking brick, by me. To solidify the connection, I made sure a specific paper trail of internal memos and dubious contracts led back to dates coinciding with David's bachelor party and our canceled wedding. It wasn't just about the facts. It was about the timing, about showing the deliberate, calculated nature of their actions. The plan was now set in motion. Below the calm, unassuming surface of our Midwestern town, a quiet storm was brewing, ready to break. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. The local newspaper, the London Chronicle, ran it as their lead piece. Builders' ethics questioned in city development deals, the headline blared, prominently featuring Jessica's family development firm. The article, meticulously researched by Mark Jenkins, detailed a web of financial malfeasance, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and ethical breaches stretching back years. The public outcry was immediate, a furious roar from a community that had long suspected such dealings. David, with his established connection to Jessica and her family's firm, found his professional reputation swiftly tarnished. The article, while not directly accusing him of criminal activity, painted him as deeply involved in the social and financial circles of a disreputable family. His application for the prestigious position at the new hospital project, once considered a sure thing, was quietly withdrawn amidst the burgeoning scandal. David's medical career, which had been so bright, so promising, began to unravel under the glare of public scrutiny. The quiet professional standing he'd built was now tainted, his name synonymous with compromised integrity. His family was devastated. Martha called me again, her voice tight with a cold fury directed at her son. "He's ruined us, Sarah," she'd hissed, her usual composure utterly shattered. "The shame. How could he?" She spoke of whispered conversations at church, of averted gazes in the grocery store. The social repercussions were immediate and brutal. Jessica's father's company, already struggling under the weight of past accusations, faced an onslaught of legal challenges and a swift financial collapse. Projects stalled, investors pulled out, and their carefully constructed empire crumbled. Jessica herself became a pariah. Her social standing, once propped up by her father's wealth, vanished overnight. The glittering, new money lifestyle she'd flaunted was diminished, replaced by a desperate struggle to salvage what remained. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a quiet observer to the storm I had unleashed. There was a mix of satisfaction, a cold, sharp feeling that settled deep in my chest, but it was also tinged with a hollow triumph, a realization that even the complete ruin of their lives, couldn't fully heal the wound they had inflicted. Then the phone rang. It was David. His voice, when I answered, was broken, raw with despair. "Sarah," he rasped, "I need your help. Please, this is all falling apart." He spoke of losing everything, of the accusations, of Jessica's father's company collapsing. He sounded desperate, a shadow of the confident man I had known. "You did this, didn't you, Sarah?" he accused, his voice thick with a sudden realization, a recognition of my invisible hand in his downfall. He didn't ask how or why. He simply knew. I didn't confirm it. I didn't deny it directly. There was a pause, a long, telling silence on my end of the line. "You chose your path, David," I said, finally, my voice calm, flat, utterly devoid of emotion. I spoke the words into the receiver, and then, without waiting for a reply, I hung up the phone. The click of the receiver was a sound of stark finality. The revenge felt complete. It was a powerful, undeniable validation of my broken heart, a demonstration that betrayal had a price. Yet, as I sat in the quiet of my home, the echoes of his broken voice fading, a part of me felt no joy, no exhilaration, Only a profound, almost bone-deep exhaustion settled over me, a weariness that went beyond sleep. David's downfall was absolute. Within weeks of the article breaking, his medical license was revoked, the ethical breaches in his association with Jessica's family deemed incompatible with the profession's standards. His career, once a source of such pride and promise, was utterly destroyed. I saw him once, months later, stocking shelves at a late-night grocery store on the outskirts of town. He looked thinner, his shoulders slumped, his once sharp eyes dulled. He didn't see me. He was a shadow, broken and alone, a ghost of the man I had loved. Jessica's family, the source of her lavish lifestyle, was ruined. Her father faced criminal charges, and the company dissolved amidst bankruptcy and lawsuits. Jessica, too, faced legal battles and public humiliation, her name synonymous with the scandal. Her sparkling new money had turned to dust. The satisfaction I had initially felt, that cold, sharp vindication, began to wane. It was replaced by a complex tapestry of emotions, a lingering sadness, a quiet regret, and an undeniable emptiness. The victory tasted flat, somehow, leaving an acrid aftertaste. "Did it make me happy, Lisa?" I asked one afternoon, sitting across from her in a quiet cafe. The question hung between us, heavy and honest. I looked at the coffee cup, avoiding her gaze. "All of it. Did it make me happy?" Lisa reached across the table, covering my hand. "It brought you justice, Sarah," she said softly, "but justice doesn't always bring peace." Her words resonated, a clear bell in the quiet of my thoughts. I realized then the heavy cost of my revenge, not just for David, but for myself. The rage that had driven me had also consumed a part of me, leaving a hollow space behind. The morality of my actions, while justified in the throes of betrayal and pain, had also left its mark, a scar on my own conscience. I needed to find a different path. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping with after-school programs for children. The small, genuine smiles, the simple act of helping, began to fill some of the emptiness. It was a constructive path, one that built up rather than tore down. The house on Elm Street, once a beacon of our future, had become a tomb of my past. I put it on the market, ready to sever the last remnant of David. I sold the house and moved to a new town, seeking anonymity and a quieter existence. It was a place where no one knew my story, a blank slate where I could simply be Sarah. I dedicated myself to personal growth, attending therapy sessions that helped me unravel the deep knots of resentment and pain. I sought genuine connections, building relationships based on trust and shared values, free from the shadows of my past. It was a long, arduous process, but slowly, tentatively, I began to learn to forgive myself for the anger that had consumed me, for the choices made in the throes of betrayal. The scars of what David did and what I did in return remained. They were etched deep, a permanent part of my history. But from that crucible, I emerged stronger, wiser, and with a compassion for myself and others that I hadn't possessed before. My story wasn't over. It was evolving. Looking towards the horizon of a new life, I understood that true rebuilding meant living a future built on truth, not on the bitter foundations of revenge. I am 32 years old now. My dark hair, fair skin, and blue eyes are often complimented. The story of David, of Jessica, of the wedding that never happened, it all feels like a lifetime ago, a decade separating me from that raw, fractured woman. The initial rush of retribution eventually faded, leaving behind a quiet understanding of the intricate cost. I saw David's downward spiral, the ruin of Jessica's family, and there was no joy in it, only a profound sense of closure mixed with a lingering weariness. The path to rebuilding was slow, deliberate. Selling the house, leaving the city, embracing anonymity in a new place. It was about finding my own peace, not in the destruction of others, but in the construction of myself. The scars from that betrayal remain, a permanent part of my history, but they no longer define me. I learned that true strength isn't found in vengeance, but in forgiveness, even of myself for the anger that had once consumed me. My story isn't over. It's a continuous journey, built now on truth, quiet resilience, and the hope of genuine connection.